I'm Jim Collison and live from the Gallup studios here in Omaha, Nebraska, and the Gallup offices in Sydney, Australia. This is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on February 7th, 2017. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you have questions during this webcast, we do have a live chat room. It's available for you right below the main video window. Just look right down below there. You can, in the bottom left-hand corner, it'll say log in. Click that, put your name in where it says guest, or choose the guest account, put your name in there, hit submit. You can join us in the live chat room. If you're listening to the recorded version or have questions about custom strengths coaching solutions for small, medium, or large organizations, contact us through our email. Send that to coaching@gallup.com, and don't forget, you can use the contact form right there on the live page. Don't forget to also visit the Gallup Strength Center, just gallupstrengthcenter.com, for all your coaching resources and Clifton Strengths Finder training needs. You can also catch the video on both streaming and downloadable audio. We have a ton of it available for you out there as well. The links to this show, as well as all the other past shows that we've done, a couple hundred that are out there, you can get that in our coaching blog, coaching.gallup.com. And Lingenfelter is our host today and works as a learning solutions consultant with Gallup in our Sydney, Australia office. And I haven't seen you in a long time. Great to have you back on Call to Coach.
Oh, it's great to be here, Jim. You know, I love this. So thanks for having me. Today, I'm having one of those moments where I realize just how far away we are, because you guys just had a Super Bowl, did you not?
We did indeed last night, yeah.
Yeah, and it was who, the Patriots versus
Falcons.
I got that right? Versus the Falcons.
Patriots and the Falcons, yeah.
Yeah, and so my brother and my mother just flew over from the States. When my brother got on the airplane at halftime, I think that the Falcons looked like they were, dead ringers to win. He's landed and has not seen the second half of the game, and he doesn't know. So it's one of those moments where you realize, there's a lot of life that can happen in that plane flight between the U.S. and in Australia. That's for sure.
It's a long flight, though, Ann, but it's great time to listen to all our webcasts. I'll just pimp those one more time. If you're going to be on a plane that long, download some webcasts and listen to them as you're flying.
Yeah, absolutely. So today our guest is Linda Leonard, and I've known Linda for a little while, and she is a fantastic person, especially right now, to come and talk about the topic that is very timely in Australia, because we're in the process of kicking off the Gallup student poll here in Australia. I know that you guys run that in the States, and there's millions of students who take part there. We're trying to get a robust sample of year 5 to year 13 students here in Australia, New Zealand. And Linda is part of a school that has an amazing success story about using the Gallup student poll. And of course, there was a strengths intervention on the backside of that. Linda is a senior executive who's responsible for culture, support, and innovation at Heritage Christian School in Port Macquarie, Australia. She also runs her own business called Assist Global, and she does a lot of consulting work for other schools around how you can bring a strengths-based approach. So Linda, welcome to Call to Coach. We're so pleased that you could join us today, and very excited to hear your story.
Thank you so much for having me. It is very exciting, and I'm glad we're connected all together now.
Yeah, absolutely. Our viewers are going to want to know from the beginning what your top 5 are, so I'll let them know straight up that they're ideation, strategic, relator, input, and individualization. And I know she also has adaptability up there, because we had a few IT issues getting going, and it was not a problem. So she and Jim are very good in that way. And I think adaptability would also be a great strength to have when you're an educator. So I'm sure we'll hear a bit about that. But let's go back, Linda. Heritage Christian is truly a remarkable success story, and I think a great example of how using the Gallup student poll can be a way to measure the sort of change that happens. So do you mind starting there? Just take us through the journey, what Heritage Christian was like before, how you got introduced to the poll, and just take it from there.
So we're a small Christian school on the mid-north coast of New South Wales in Australia, and it's been a school that's been going for about 30 years now, and we've found over the time that we've had our ups and downs, and we've had to look at our culture of our school very closely, especially in the last 8 years. And the Gallup tools that we've used to do that have just been exceptional. They say they do what they say they're going to do. I came across the Gallup poll on a Facebook. I think somebody promoted it, and I went, oh wow, that looks good. What was attractive about it was the fact that it highlights for students their own voice about how they're actually learning, whether they're engaged, what their hope levels are like. And having read the book Making Hope Happen, that helped me understand how much hope, as when we go down through all the different layers of how we can engage students, where hope actually lies. And that was the crux of where we engage students or not, is whether they're hopeful or not. Our student population is wide and varied, as most, I suppose, schools are. Each child has a really interesting story. And when you understand whether this child is hopeful or not, that's where we start. So we first of all had to find out where our students sat, and our first results weren't fabulous. I think they were quite confronting, and we just didn't know. We had a bunch of happy kids. We thought we were doing really well with our education. We thought that things were working well, but we didn't realise where our students were actually thinking. So our first poll was confronting, but it was so good to actually see what we needed to do. One of the items in the hope section is about understanding whether you are able to solve a problem or not. And that was the lowest scoring item. It says I have more than one way to solve a problem. And we found out that our students didn't have that. And we didn't know that, which explained a lot to do with their learning. So when they came across a problem, they tended to give up more than actually keep going. So it was one of the first things we tried to address. We talked a lot about the future. So one of the first things we needed to do was to work out whether our students were able to think about the future, because that's where hope stems from. Do I know that my tomorrow can be better than today? And through the conversations, we even had one student say, why don't we have a subject called future? We have a subject called history. Why don't we have a subject called future? And I went, yeah, why don't we? So that was our first going through the poll. And so we're very keen, after doing some things and talking with our students and creating a language. We do everything through language at our school. So the cultural language is really important. So we created our language around hope, and we had a year of hope. We've since had a year of engagement and a year of strength. So every year we have a particular year that we really focus on things. And the second round of our engagement poll, we were able to double hope within a year, and that was when we started to realise this matters. And you could see it and you could hear it in how the students would talk back to us. So it's really good.
If we did nothing more on this show than talk about how you doubled hope, I think that would be an absolute gem. Just because I think so many people would be wanting to understand how you made that work, how you touched on one thing. You said, let's have a subject called future. I don't know if you did that or not, but what does that look like? And I want to take you back just a few steps back and say, firstly, to those who have not done the Gallup student poll, the definition of hope as the way that it's applied in the Gallup student poll is the ideas and energy we have for the future drives effort, academic achievement, and retention of students of all ages. And the book that you touched on by Shane Lopez, Why Hope Matters, shows the scholarship behind the fact that student levels of hope are actually more indicative of completion than grades. So basically it's for a student to be hopeful is more important in some ways than for them to get great scores. So it's really about seeing that hope really is about seeing that the future can be better than the present, and that they have some ability to affect change in that way. So we can start to see why it's so important, and measuring it is so important. But when you think about it, if a school measures levels of hope, and there's 3 categories, right, that the students can fall in once you start to measure things like hope: hopeful, stuck and discouraged.
That's correct, yeah.
And so obviously we would like students to be in the hopeful category. But when we see high levels of stuck or discouraged, we know that we're going to have problems with issues like you talked about, problem solving and such. When you get results back, and when your executive team got results back that showed how poor the hope results were for your student body, why did they not stick their heads in the sand or say, I'm not going to look at that data, there's something wrong with it, or that's not, sometimes it's easy to say that those numbers are too scary, we wouldn't know where to start, we're not going to address those numbers. What was different about Heritage Christian that didn't happen?
We had to respect, first of all, that the students had given their voice. That's the first thing. They had told us that they were stuck or they were really, really discouraged. What's the other one? Stuck or...
So hopeful, stuck, or discouraged. Yep.
Discouraged.
Yep.
So you can't ignore that. They took a risk and through the poll said, this is where we're at. What was exceptional about the poll is knowing that every item that is listed in the poll that the student responds to, you can do something about. So it wasn't about solving the whole of the hope issue. It was looking at certain items and that said that they trusted the adults around them. They had all that, but internally they were saying, we do not feel hopeful because of the skill sets that we have. We don't know what our tomorrow is going to look like, and we're not feeling overly hopeful about that. So it was actually coming to an understanding of that word hope to begin with. Hope's a very general word. It's not, we use it so, in all sorts of our language, we just use it and say it. But to really understand the definition of hope, and we use that definition of knowing that our tomorrows can be better than today, we're moving forward. In my office, as you know, I have a display that says hope is like oxygen. And so understanding that if we were going to give oxygen to our education and what we were doing to school, we needed to have an understanding about hope. We needed to not provide hope for our students, but help our students find hope. That's the key. We could give hope if we kept on giving students things, they're not owning what they need to do. So it's about helping the students find their next piece of hope. So often when students come into my office where life's gotten a bit complicated, it's not about solving the problem for them. It's helping them find their next piece of hope so they can start solving that problem. I just don't think you can ignore the scores when they're so clear to you, and you need to do something about it. And because you've got a way of finding out how to do something about it is the key. Looking at each of those items and going, what can we do? It's not necessarily a direct roadmap. If anything, it's about starting a discussion, and students will talk. They will tell you what they need.
I love that picture of the student finding their next piece of hope, and that you're not giving them a solution, a stamp, this is what's going to fix you, but helping them find it themselves. And you say students will talk, but that is where I take my hat off to you and say, actually, without the level of trust that you've been able to develop with these students don't talk. They come in and they clam up. What is your secret to having students open up and talk?
I do have relator as a strength, and I have individualization. So for me personally, I use those strengths. But wider in our school, we like to think that our school has a relational model of schooling. So we know that you learn best in relationship. The relationships are based on respect. And so that's a two-way street. It's just not demanding respect from students, but for every adult there to show respect as well. That when you build relationship, then you have those trust levels. So we encourage our staff to have appropriate relationships with their students so those conversations can happen. It's just how we do school, and we are very strategic about that, and we often talk about the importance of that. We listen. That's the most important thing, is to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. For those who aren't familiar with the Gallup student poll, the questions that are asked in the hope section are something like these. I know I will complete high school, and students are asked to strongly agree. That's what we hope to see, is a strongly agree to that. There is an adult in my life who cares about my future. I can think of many ways to get good results. I energetically pursue my goals. I can find lots of ways around any problem, and I know I will find a good job after I leave school. Wow, that last one in this day and age is so remarkably important, isn't it? The whole idea of, the ultimate outcome of an education is really a great life and a great job. And why are we doing all of this if not to be able to understand what it is that we have to contribute in life going forward? What specific things did you guys put into place to address those items?
Our students knew they were going to complete, most students realised they were going to complete high school. It's kind of a mandated thing in Australia. The adult that cares about them, we make sure that at least at school, and most of our students have wider family, etc. But if there are students that don't have that connection, we make sure that we find that and they know somebody actually cares about them. It's the future bit that's the key, and I think schools are sometimes seen as a safe place. They get the next 5 or 6 years once they start high school, they know where they're going. The next bit is quite daunting. We're scrabbling with it as well because the choices are so wide and the opportunities may not be as, being in a regional town, may not be as high as where they can be elsewhere. So for students in our town, often they have to move as well. So they've got to start their adult life quite soon. Whilst we didn't do specific activities, and that might be appropriate for certain schools, it's the conversation. So we talked a lot to the staff about having future-focused conversations, trying to link what they were doing, and sometimes it's really hard to link what you're doing in school to a future, but to talk to them about, well, how much money do you want to earn? What do you think it costs to live? What do you think you're going to be good at, which is where the strengths come in, so they understand who they are. That's one of the keys, that they also know that their staff are interested in who they are, and there's nothing more valuable than that, to do that with the strengths program. So it was very much about conversations, defining the words hope, future, and also problem solving. We're still really wrestling with that. It's deeper and bigger than what we originally thought, and we realised it actually starts way back into early childhood. So what we do even in our primary school is going to need to impact right through into adulthood. So it doesn't happen just when someone turns 13 or 14, they can't solve problems. It actually happens way back in when children are very young. And what are we doing as adults? What is the environment we're creating that says that you give up straight away when you're faced with a problem? I think it's general out there, but also schools can create teaching and learning environments that don't promote problem solving. So what are we doing in the classroom that will promote that? So it's you've got to go deep. I think you can't just look at it at a surface and go, here's a program, here's an activity. It's actually a mindset that you embed, which then is a cultural mindset which has to come about through language, the language that you use. We found even just using the word hope and explaining the meaning of that and talking about the future, that simply got the 50% increase in hope on the survey.
Just having a conversation. That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. So you got the results. At this point, after your first iteration with the Gallup student poll, were you using strengths in the school with the staff and students already, or did you bring it in after the survey? We had sort of an organic approach to it all. So there had been with students and with some staff. The school was going through a lot of change, so we were careful about how much we brought strengths in at that point in time, because we definitely wanted to be embedded, and you have to consider how much change the school is going through, what is culturally happening, there are other focuses. We've continued to do that, and we're sort of embedding it exceptionally at a higher level than we have this year, which is great, in the next couple of weeks. Strengths had been mainly for the senior students. Definitely we started with our executive and brought it out to the teaching staff, because we want it to be a language. The adults in the school had to talk the language. There was no point in having the students talking the language and having no connection to it. We want students to be able to sit down with a teacher and say, oh, wow, you've got command as a strength, and I've got command. How did you
learn to use your command strength when you were younger? What were the challenges? What was, how did that work? How did you grow it as a strength? So we want those conversations to happen regularly.
How do you do that, Linda? Because I have a lot of respect for teachers on the front line, and everyone that I talk to in your situation says we have so much that we're meant to be accomplishing in a day, so much that's in the curriculum already. I don't have space for one more thing, and I understand that. So how is it that you see you're able to integrate a new thing?
It's really important to go slow. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So as I've worked with not only my school but with other schools, it's about, first of all, looking at your cultural custodians, I call them. That's your executive team. And your principal has to see that this has a valuable input into the school environment. If they're not going to get it, it's going to be very hard to embed it through the wider school. Experiencing the whole strengths process, the coaching, etc., there's no better way to understand how it can actually come in. Sorry, my phone is going a little bit flat. We'll work on that. So embedding that in through the executive, because they control the culture in the school. Another thing, if it's another program or another activity or something people have to put into their day-to-day teaching in a structured way, you can only do so much of that because there is no time. If it's part of a conversation that can happen as you're teaching, out in the playground, between staff, then it can be embedded right throughout the school. So it's a cultural language that you institute within the school. That takes time. You need to make sure that everyone understands the language. You need to understand that people haven't got any misunderstandings about it, that it's at a really deep level, that we get it. And once those conversations happen, that's just natural. You can't stop them. So it's to do it quickly, or to do it as an event, or to do it as a series of activities, which you need to do. But if that's all you do, it's not going to have the same impact as if you do it culturally. So the school has to understand why they're doing. How does this, in fact, make things better? How does it improve things? How does it make it more efficient? Because if it is another thing that's going to take more time, more effort, then it's not going to be good. Schools focus on the how we teach. That's right around the world, how we teach, the pedagogy. What we teach is the lovely political conversation right around the world. What are we teaching? This strengths focus on who we teach, and it's the missing wheel to what we do in education. When we talk about who we teach, we're often trying to solve problems, fixing a deficit or remediating something. That's not, we need to do that occasionally in the who, but far more we need to understand who we teach, and strengths is just fantastic for that. So it's the third wheel to me. It's the what, the how, and the who. Strengths play into that. So it makes our what and how much more appropriate.
So, Linda, can you give some specifics about how you do this in the classroom? I mean, exactly how did different teachers bring it in? Do you have some examples about how you were able to bring sort of a strengths approach into the classroom?
Yes. We had to... there's a few things we have done, and it's mainly, first of all, is empowering the teacher to have the conversation. We have one teacher who had a very small group with a student who had high competition. And he came across the challenge of trying to get this student to continue to improve their results. And because the student was in a very small group, they were already at the top of that group. And it was a really deep and long conversation that we had over several weeks and months to work out how can we make a difference in this student, because they were about to do their HSC, and that's with tens of thousands of students. And we wanted to keep on improving the students' performance. And because of their competition, it was very hard for them to see the bigger picture that they were going into, because they were competing quite well within the small group they were in. So there are certain activities where you certainly get students to explain what their strengths are, what they do well, get the conversation going with their teacher. One of the best things you can do is for a teacher to talk about their own strengths. So one of our teachers is a very high maximizer. And the students said, oh, he was always, he said, comes across being critical. We're not ever good enough. And I went, okay. And so we got the teacher to explain to them that he's a maximizer and he's recognizing what's excellent and wanting to grow them even further. So having short phrases to explain who you are as a teacher, and also helping students understand how their strengths impact their everydayness, every conversation, every activity, bringing that out to the fore and having conversations around it is the key. It's one of the things we're thinking about is even having stickers on diaries that show the 5 strengths. So there is it's not a forced conversation, but a continual conversation that can take place.
And I think it's
natural.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important too that they understand, both staff and students, that the whole goal here is not to say, I know my strengths so well, I can recite verbatim the definition of each of my strengths, and I, remember them no matter what. I mean, there's not a test at the end to know how well you know your strengths. Strengths is nothing but a vehicle. It's just a way to get to whatever your goal is. So let's articulate your goal, and then let's look at the tools you have in your kit in order to get there. And that's what your strengths are about, and continually pointing those towards whatever your goal is. Now, look, I'm going to shift gears here, Linda, because I know, we probably are more than halfway through the show. And in the Gallup student poll, as you know, talks about hope, well-being, engagement. And in Australia, it also talks about entrepreneurial aspiration. We've talked about the hope bit. I'd like to touch base just a little bit on the engagement and well-being aspects, and if we have time, a bit on entrepreneurial aspiration too, as to what you found at Heritage Christian and how you address that. I know when you and I first started talking, you told me that the first thing you did was a year of hope, and because that was the most glaring or the biggest pain point for you guys. And then you shifted after that into a year of engagement. I love that whole idea of a year of something, and maybe it doesn't need to be that long for some organizations or schools. Maybe that's the perfect amount of time. But when we're talking about engagement, we're talking about the involvement and enthusiasm for school, reflecting how well students are known and how often they get to do what they do best. And we look at students who are engaged, not engaged, and then those who are actively disengaged. From your perspective, tell me just a bit about how you guys looked at this element of the student poll.
So engagement, my job at the school, it's called head of CSI, which sounds like, crime fighting kind of a job, but sometimes it is. But it's also making sure that every student is engaged in learning. So we join welfare and well-being to well-doing. So it was something that we learned from Kurt Liesvelt about this idea of well-being and well-doing. And when we say well-being, we always say well-doing, because that's the engagement part. How are you engaging in your learning? There are lots of reasons why students don't engage in their learning. And one of the ones that we found was students weren't always recognising that their teachers cared about their learning. Teachers felt that they were showing that. Teachers felt that they were doing that. So we had to look at and say, well, that message isn't necessarily getting across to the student. What do they need to know? What is it that they want to know from their teacher? How do they want to receive feedback? What do they need from teaching staff to know that their learning is cared about? So our year of engagement, it went for a year, but it's something we're still working on, very much so with our teaching staff, about how they're approaching the teaching and learning in a meaningful way that really resonates with students. We're having students come in and sit down and having conversations with teachers saying, this is how I learn best. And, when you talk like this, it doesn't work for me. And they're brave conversations, and our staff are incredibly courageous in sitting there and hearing feedback from students to say, this is how I learn best. And I was in a conversation last week, and the students actually outlined to the teacher how they'd like to see their lessons run. And that sounds like, other students are running the show, but they were saying, this is why we learn best. This is how we will engage best. So, yeah, it was really important.
Yeah, well, hats off to your teachers who are open to receive that feedback. I mean, and that's fantastic. And of course, every student is going to learn differently, so there's going to have to be some tweaking, I imagine, for each and every one. It's interesting. I saw some new data that's just come out recently about engagement levels of students in Australia, and it was talking about, we think about disengaged students, these troublemakers who are, causing lots of, big issues and fights in the hallway and things like that. We certainly have those, and we tend to call those actively disengaged. But by far the largest percentage of disengaged students are the ones who just sit there. And they never contribute. They just sit there and zone out. They're not really learning much. They're not taking any initiative about their own learning. And sometimes they can be disrespectful and dismissive of the teachers. How do you guys approach that and deal with that? And I'm not, assuming that you guys have it all worked out and it's perfect, because there's no such place as perfect. But I'd like to know what you've seen that has worked.
So we're about to embark on a project called Visible Learning, and if you're in Australia, you will know about John Hattie, who has done the research about what does learning look like, and he's created tools around what does visible learning look like, so you can actually tell that your students are engaged. That's where having the feedback from the student poll gives us direct feedback that says this is how we're seeing things, and it links into any of the initiatives that we're taking on. So we will rely very much on the student poll, this initiative of what we call visible learning. So it's really look at the teach skills, how we're teaching, all the sorts of little things that you can do within a lesson about being a teacher to see whether it's actually being effective. Using the Gallup student poll will help us know whether this has been will be an effective program to embark on. So that's where having this data and information is useful in ways that you may not realise in how it can lead back into the other initiatives that you do within a school. It's actually having the student voices. It's quick, it's easy, it doesn't take long, but it's spot on to what they tell you. So we will use that data. That's the engagement is really about how we as teachers, what are we doing, and are we making sure that we are understanding what students need to be engaged. There's a quiet student sitting there not making any noise may look like they're writing everything down, may look like they're attending, but the research is showing that they're not. They're somewhere else. That's too long a classrooms doing that.
Yep. So just as we close the engagement bit, some of the items that Gallup Student Poll asks students around that are: I have a best friend at work, a best friend in school. I feel safe in this school. My teachers make me feel my schoolwork is important. At this school, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. That's the strengths question. In the last 7 days, I have received recognition or praise for doing good schoolwork. My school is committed to building the strengths of each student. I have at least one teacher who makes me excited about the future. In the last month, I volunteered my time to help others. That's something that is a new addition. This last year, we added it. It's around, it's a philanthropy index. And so it's giving us some feedback as to when students are involved in volunteer or charitable work, how does that impact their levels of hope, well-being, engagement? I hate to say this because we're going to have to start winding down the show, and I could talk to you for a lot longer. I know you have a lot more to tell, and I hope folks who are listening to this will look up Linda. We'll make sure that on the playback that your email address for your work as a consultant is there so they can reach out to you. But let's just talk really quickly, if we could, about well-being. Well-being in the Gallup Student Poll is how we think about and experience our lives. It tells us how students are doing today and is predictive of their future success. And we look at 3 categories: thriving, struggling, and suffering. Tell me just quickly what your experience was with well-being, and perhaps a bit about well-being and well-doing, as you mentioned before.
I think one of the greatest understandings that we've gathered from that is how well-being is connected to hope and engagement. I think there's that saying, if you double hope and you double engagement, the impact that has on well-being is phenomenal. And we saw that when we doubled the hope, we had the exact amount of increase in well-being. We knew we then had to work on engagement. So it's understanding the links between those 3. you don't want a student who says that their well-being is suffering. That's not okay. We need to be responsive to that. What we also understood was sometimes you cannot impact a student's well-being. You cannot change their life circumstances. Sometimes that's out of a school's environment's control, but you can impact somebody's well-being by promoting well-doing, allowing a student to do what they do best every day. So as the staff, we are really curious about that. We make sure we know what that is so we can provide opportunities, construct opportunities that will improve a student's well-being. So we sometimes address well-being through well-doing. We also look at making sure that students' friendship circles are good. Everybody has a friend. So we do that through sociograms and we map that. We know how it's looking from the data. It's just so rich, the data that you get from the poll, that you can then go and explore what's really going on. If students are happy and feeling safe and they've got friends, they're ready to learn. So it's as simple as that. It's important.
You make it sound simple. I know it's not. And again, hats off to you guys and those at Heritage Christian for the work you've done over the last few years. And also thank you to you guys for being one of the first schools to pilot the Gallup student poll. As I said, we've been doing it for years in the States. We have millions of students, but we wanted an Australian and New Zealand national benchmark that really could say, how's Australia doing in this regard? And so, as I mentioned, Jim's going to put the flyer up to show some information, just so those listening know. The Gallup student poll is open for registration now. It runs from March the 7th to April the 7th this year, and the results come out a month or so later, and we do a big release. It just goes down to the grade level, and it's fully confidential. It takes about 10 minutes to be done, and can be done in a classroom with all the kids on computers, and it's very, very inexpensive. So it's a nominal fee for schools to participate. I think regardless of the size of your school, you'll pay around $850 for the entire year for all of your kids to participate in it. So it is a great measure. And regardless of what your intervention is, whether it's strengths or something else, it's important to be able to see how it's moving the needle. And this is a very easy way to do that. So would love to see more schools get involved. We're hoping that we can get some more of the remote and, Indigenous community schools involved. We would like to have a really well-rounded sample. Having said that, we have, over 35,000 students who were surveyed this year. So that's pretty good. Listen, Linda, really appreciate your joining us today to share the great impact that you've had at the school. You have been a massive driver behind that. So thank you for that. I wish I had more time to talk to you. There's a lot more I'd like to discuss with you about parent engagement and how that gets involved in entrepreneurial aspiration, perhaps on another show. Will you come back?
And we'll have all the technology right.
Great. Fantastic.
And I'll just remind everyone, if they want to look that up on the web, I showed that on the screen, but for some of our audio only listeners, as we were showing that, you may not be able to see it. So if you want to get more information, go to Gallup Student Poll, all one word, gallupstudentpoll.com.au, or you can send us an email, education_AUS @gallup.com. And of course, if you can't get any of those, you have trouble with those, you can always send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, and we'll route that over to them there in Australia. Remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strengths Center. Send us your questions or comments, contribution stuff you want to add to this, to that email address, coaching@gallup.com. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this program, as well as all the past ones, including the links to our Facebook group, YouTube page, iTunes and RSS feeds, our phone and Android apps, all those really tools we have available for you on the Coaches blog. We're getting a lot of hits on that blog recently, coaching.gallup.com. We'll remind everyone, we are also offering the CliftonStrengths Summit that is coming up here in the United States this summer, July 17th, 18th, and 19th. Not too late if you're thinking about making a trip over here to Omaha to get that done. Information about the summit is available at CliftonStrengthsSummit.com. For both Linda and Ann, thank you guys for coming out this evening or this morning. Great having both of you. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.